The day I moved into my lakeside home was the culmination of a 40-year dream. I had spent my entire adult life in corporate America, grinding through 14-hour days, sacrificing weekends, and postponing happiness for someday. That someday had finally arrived. After decades of hard work, I had enough saved to retire early and purchase the modest but perfect two-bedroom cottage overlooking Lake Sherwood. The property was not the largest or the most expensive in the neighborhood, but what it lacked in square footage, it made up for in location. My back deck extended toward the water, connecting to a shared community dock where I could moor my small sailboat. The moment I signed the papers, I felt decades of stress melt away. My blood pressure medication could finally be reduced. The tension headaches that had plagued me throughout my career began to dissipate. The lake became my therapy. Every morning I would rise with the sun, brew a strong cup of coffee, and sit on the back porch watching mist rise from the water. By mid-morning I would be sailing, feeling the gentle rocking of waves beneath my hull, the cool breeze against my face. I named my boat Liberty, a corny choice perhaps, but apt for how I felt out on the open water, free, unencumbered, at peace. The neighborhood itself seemed perfect. To the left of my property lived the Millers, a retired couple who had been there for 20 years. They brought me a homemade pie on moving day and offered to show me the best fishing spots. To my right was a younger family, the Johnsons, with twin boys who were fascinated by my boat. I taught them to tie nautical knots one afternoon while their parents watched appreciatively from their deck. I was invited to neighborhood barbecues. People waved as they walked their dogs past my house. It felt like I had finally found my place in the world after decades of feeling like an outsider in crowded conference rooms. The water access was the jewel in the crown. It was why I had chosen this specific house, even paying slightly above market value to secure it. The first hint of trouble came 3 weeks after I had settled in. I was returning from a morning sail when I noticed a woman standing on the shore, clipboard in hand, watching me dock with narrowed eyes. She wore pressed khaki pants, a polo shirt with the neighborhood logo embroidered on the chest, and a visor that failed to conceal her frown lines. "You must be the new owner in Lot 14, she said without introducing herself. "I am Carol Winters, president of the Lake Sherwood Homeowners Association." I extended my hand with a smile. "Nice to meet you. I have been meaning to introduce myself at one of the meetings." She ignored my outstretched hand and gestured toward my boat. "Are you aware of the dock guidelines regarding boat dimensions and mooring procedures?" I blinked, taken aback by her cold demeanor. "I believe so. The previous owner walked me through everything, and the real estate agent provided all the HOA documents. Is there a problem?" "We will see," she replied cryptically, making a note on her clipboard. "The association takes water access very seriously. Not everyone understands the responsibility that comes with lake privileges." Before I could respond, she turned and walked away, her posture rigid and unwelcoming. I dismissed the interaction as typical HOA bureaucracy. Every neighborhood had its sticklers for rules, I reasoned. I would not let one unpleasant person diminish my joy in my new home. That evening, as I sat on my deck watching the sunset paint the lake in shades of orange and gold, Ted Miller called over from his neighboring property. "I see you met the Iron Lady," he said with a knowing smile. "Carol, yes, briefly. She seemed concerned about my boat." Ted chuckled, but there was something in his expression, a warning perhaps. "Carol has been president for 6 years running. Nobody runs against her anymore. Word of advice, stay on her good side if you can." I nodded politely but inwardly shrugged off his concern. I had dealt with difficult personalities throughout my corporate career. One overzealous HOA president was nothing to worry about. The lake was my sanctuary, my reward for decades of hard work. Nothing and no one could take that away from me. How naive I was. The first formal complaint arrived in my mailbox exactly 1 month after moving in. The envelope bore the Lake Sherwood HOA logo, and inside was a notice of violation regarding unauthorized modifications to shared water access structures. I read the document 3 times, baffled. I had made no modifications whatsoever to the dock. My boat was the standard size allowed by HOA regulations, and I had followed every mooring guideline to the letter. Attached was a grainy photograph of my boat tied to the dock, with a red circle around the cleats I used, the same cleats every other boat owner used. The document was signed by Carol Winters, with a note indicating I had 7 days to remedy the situation or face a $200 fine. No specific remedy was mentioned. I immediately called the number provided and requested clarification. The association secretary, clearly uncomfortable, suggested I attend the next board meeting to address my concerns. When I pressed for details about the alleged violation, she simply repeated that Carol had documented irregularities with my dock usage. 3 days later, I returned from a grocery run to find workers installing a metal gate at the entrance to the community dock. A keypad lock was being mounted, and several neighbors stood watching the proceedings with confused expressions. Marie Johnson, my neighbor with the twins, approached me as I stepped out of my car. "Did you get any notice about this?" she asked, gesturing toward the installation. I shook my head. "Nothing. Do you know what is going on?" Emergency HOA measure, apparently. Carol called for a special executive session yesterday. Something about security concerns and liability issues with the dock. The next morning, an HOA representative went door to door distributing electronic key fobs to access the newly gated dock to every homeowner except me. When I inquired about my fob, I was told my access was under review pending resolution of ongoing violations. My attempts to contact Carol directly were met with silence. Emails went unanswered. Phone calls were not returned. Desperate for answers, I attended the next HOA meeting, held in the community center. The room fell silent when I entered, and several neighbors avoided eye contact. Carol sat at the center of the board table, her posture impeccable, her expression impassive. During the open forum, I calmly explained my situation, the unexplained violation notice, the lack of clarification, and most importantly, the denial of dock access that was explicitly included in my property deed. As I spoke, Carol maintained a cold smile, occasionally whispering to board members beside her. "Thank you for your concerns," she said when I finished. "The board has determined that certain homeowners have not demonstrated proper adherence to community standards regarding shared resources. Until compliance is established, restrictions will remain in place." "What specifically am I not complying with?" I asked, keeping my voice level despite mounting frustration. "The violations have been documented and communicated," she replied dismissively. Next item on the agenda. After the meeting, a sympathetic board member approached me privately. "I did not want to say this publicly," he whispered, "but Carol has it out for you. She showed us emails where you supposedly argued about the rules, but I never saw any evidence of that." "Because it never happened," I said. He nodded. "She told the board you were trouble from day one, said you needed to learn the rules like everyone else." The following week brought another surprise. A fine for $350 appeared on my account for unauthorized dock access. Security camera footage had captured me stepping onto the dock to check my boat, a boat I could no longer access without trespassing. When I disputed the fine, I was informed that additional penalties would accrue daily until payment was received. From my living room window, I watched as neighbors freely accessed the water. Children jumped from the dock into the cool lake. Boats came and went. The community life continued while I remained locked out, a spectator to the very lifestyle I had sacrificed so much to attain. Each morning, I still rose with the sun and brewed my coffee. But instead of the peaceful ritual that had been healing my soul, I now sat watching Liberty gently rocking in her berth, inaccessible to me, slowly collecting algae along her waterline. My sanctuary had become my prison. My freedom was now visible but unreachable, separated by an electronic gate and the cruel whims of a woman drunk on the small power she wielded over her neighbors. After weeks of escalating fines and continued exclusion, I consulted with a lawyer specializing in property disputes. Richard Hoffman listened patiently as I outlined the situation, occasionally shaking his head in dismay. When I finished, he leaned forward, hands clasped on his desk. "Unfortunately, what you are describing is not uncommon with aggressive HOAs," he said. "While I believe they are overstepping their authority, particularly regarding deeded access rights, fighting this will be complicated." "How complicated?" I asked. "HOA disputes typically take months, sometimes years, to resolve. They have legal funds built into their dues structure. You would be paying out of pocket. We could file injunctions to restore your access temporarily, but the court backlog means you might not see a resolution for 6 to 8 months at minimum." 6 to 8 months. Half a year watching my boat decay while fighting a costly legal battle against a board with deeper pockets and apparently unlimited spite. The futility of my position crashed over me like a wave. I returned home and sat on my back porch, staring at the water I could no longer touch. Depression settled over me like a heavy blanket. I stopped attending community events. I declined dinner invitations from sympathetic neighbors, unable to stomach their pity. My morning coffee ritual became a pathetic exercise in self-torture as I cataloged another day of imprisonment in my dream home. Sleep became elusive. My appetite diminished. The stress-related health issues I had left corporate America to escape began to resurface. Blood pressure rising, headaches returning. The cruel irony was not lost on me. I had purchased this home for peace, only to find war. In a last-ditch effort at reconciliation, I requested formal mediation through the HOA's own bylaws. Carol could not refuse without violating the very rules she claimed to uphold so dearly. The meeting was scheduled for a Tuesday afternoon at the community center, with a neutral mediator present. I arrived early, prepared with documentation of my property rights, the timeline of events and photographs showing my compliance with all dock regulations. The mediator, a retired judge named Thomas Garrity, reviewed my materials with interest. Carol arrived 15 minutes late, flanked by 2 board members. The meeting lasted precisely 12 minutes. After my careful presentation of facts, Carol stood up abruptly. "This individual has demonstrated a persistent disregard for community standards and a hostile attitude toward leadership," she announced to the mediator. "Furthermore, his erratic behavior makes him unfit to safely utilize shared water access. The board's decision stands." With that, she walked out, her sycophants in tow. Judge Garrity offered an apologetic shrug. "Without good faith participation, mediation cannot succeed," he said quietly. The following day, I noticed a car parked across from my house. A man with a camera with a telephoto lens was photographing my property. When I approached, he quickly drove away. This happened 3 more times that week, different cars, different people, all documenting my every move. Ted Miller confirmed my suspicions. "They are building a case against you," he said grimly. "Looking for any violation they can find: grass too long, improper trash can placement, unauthorized plantings. Carol does this. Finds ways to force people out when she decides they do not belong." I began documenting these surveillance incidents, installing my own security cameras for protection. But nothing prepared me for what happened next. On a Saturday morning, I woke to find Liberty's hull keyed deeply along the starboard side. The fuel line had been cut, and the navigation equipment smashed. Attached to my front door with packing tape was a handwritten note: "Get off our lake." I called the police immediately. The responding officer took photographs and filed a report, but his expression made it clear that nothing would come of it. "Neighborhood disputes are civil matters," he explained. "Unless you have video of the vandalism occurring, there is little we can do." That night, I sat alone in my darkened living room, watching the moonlight reflect off the water. The lake that had once represented freedom now mocked me with its proximity. My boat, named Liberty in a moment of optimistic naivety, lay damaged and unreachable. My health was deteriorating. My savings were being drained by fines and legal consultations. The dream I had worked toward for 40 years was crumbling before my eyes. Something fundamental shifted inside me that night. The corporate world I had left behind had taught me one valuable lesson: in negotiations, the party with leverage wins. Carol had leverage because she controlled access. The HOA had leverage because they controlled the rules. I had been playing a game rigged against me from the start. If I wanted to reclaim my freedom, I needed to change the game entirely. I needed to find leverage of my own. And to do that, I needed to understand exactly what I was fighting against and what vulnerabilities might exist in their armor of authority. This was no longer about access to a dock. This was about justice. This was about standing up to bullies who had broken too many people before me. This was about survival, and I was done playing by their rules. The next morning, I woke with a clarity and purpose I had not felt since my corporate days. If this was war, I would approach it like any high-stakes business negotiation, with thorough research, strategic thinking, and calculated risk. I converted my spare bedroom into a makeshift command center, tacking maps and documents to the walls, creating spreadsheets of information, and logging every interaction with the HOA. My first step was to understand exactly what Carol and her board legally controlled. I requested copies of all HOA governing documents, not just the summarized rules provided to homeowners, but the full legal articles of incorporation, boundary surveys, and land use agreements. The association secretary seemed surprised by the specificity of my request, but was obligated to provide these public records. For 3 days straight, I pored over the documents, taking detailed notes and marking inconsistencies. The critical breakthrough came when I discovered an unusual clause in the property boundary descriptions. The dock and shoreline access were described not as HOA-owned common areas, but as access easements contingent upon maintenance of lease agreement with Sherwood Marina Holdings, LLC. This single line sent me down a rabbit hole of county record searches. I drove to the county clerk's office and requested all documents related to Lake Sherwood property lines and easements. The clerk, a friendly woman named Doris, helped me navigate the archival system. "Interesting," she remarked as we reviewed a survey map. "The actual shoreline and dock structures are not part of the HOA plat. They are leased property with access rights granted to the association." "Who owns the lease?" I asked, trying to contain my excitement. Sherwood Marina Holdings is the leaseholder. They own the entire marina and boat launch area adjacent to your neighborhood. The HOA pays them for access rights. This was the leverage I had been seeking. The HOA did not own the dock they had locked me out of, they were merely leasing it, and leases could change hands. Back home, I researched Sherwood Marina Holdings, discovering it was a small investment company owned by an elderly gentleman named Frank Patterson, who had developed several lakefront properties in the 1970s. Public records indicated the lease agreement was set to expire in 6 months, with renewal negotiations underway. More importantly, I found a listing that Frank Patterson had placed with a commercial real estate broker. He was looking to sell his remaining lake property holdings, including the marina adjacent to our neighborhood and all associated lease agreements. My heart raced as I considered the implications. What if I purchased the marina and the lease rights? What if I controlled the very access point Carol had used to torment me? I knew I needed to move carefully. If Carol caught wind of my plan, she would undoubtedly attempt to block it. I contacted a business attorney, not Richard Hoffman, whom the HOA might be monitoring, but a firm in the next county with experience in commercial real estate. Under their guidance, I established a shell company called Lakeview Enterprises LLC, with no public connection to my name. I used a portion of my retirement savings as initial capital and began negotiating with Frank Patterson's broker, expressing interest in acquiring the marina property and all associated leases. The broker was delighted to find an interested buyer for what had been a slow-moving listing. "Mr. Patterson is in his 80s and looking to liquidate his holdings," she explained. "He has no interest in managing these properties anymore." Through my attorney, I arranged a private meeting with Frank at his home, explaining my interest in the property and my vision for maintaining the marina. I did not mention my issues with the HOA, presenting myself simply as an investor looking for a peaceful retirement project. Frank was candid about the situation. "That HOA has been a pain in my side for years," he confessed, "always complaining about the lease terms but never wanting to pay market rates. Their president, what is her name? Caroline something." "Carol," I offered. "Yes, that one. Nasty piece of work. Threatens legal action every time we discuss renewal terms. I will be glad to be rid of the headache." We discussed numbers, and I made an offer slightly above asking price on the condition of absolute confidentiality until closing. Frank agreed readily, clearly relieved to be passing the torch. As I drove home that evening, a plan was crystallizing in my mind. The dock Carol had used to exclude me would soon be mine. The tables were about to turn, but I needed to maintain absolute secrecy until everything was finalized. One leak, one hint of my involvement, and Carol would mobilize the HOA resources to block the sale. For the first time in months, I slept soundly that night. The waters were still troubled, but I could finally see the shore. The purchase process took nearly 2 months of careful negotiation, document preparation, and strategic planning. Throughout this period, I maintained a low profile in the neighborhood, appearing appropriately dejected whenever I encountered Carol or her allies. I even paid some of the accumulated fines to create the impression I was accepting defeat. Behind the scenes, my attorney worked diligently to expedite the closing process. We encountered several potential delays: environmental assessments, permit transfers, easement verifications, but Frank Patterson's eagerness to sell helped overcome these obstacles. The day we signed the final paperwork was surreal. Sitting in my attorney's office, watching as ownership of the entire Marina property, including the dock and water access rights, transferred to my shell company. I felt a profound sense of justice approaching. I was no longer the powerless victim in Carol's game. I now held the ultimate trump card. "Congratulations," my attorney said as I signed the last document. "Lakeview Enterprises is now the official owner of Sherwood Marina and all associated structures, including the community dock currently leased by Lake Sherwood HOA. "When will they be notified of the change in ownership?" I asked. "The standard lease transfer notice will be delivered tomorrow. They will have no legal grounds to contest the transfer. The lease terms remain unchanged until the expiration date in 4 months." I drove home slowly that day, savoring the calm before the storm. From my back porch, I gazed at the dock, my dock now, with a mixture of satisfaction and anticipation. The next morning, I watched from my kitchen window as a courier delivered the ownership transfer notification to Carol's house. Through binoculars, I could see her expression change as she read the document: confusion, then alarm, then that rarest of sights, Carol Winters losing her composure. Within hours, an emergency HOA board meeting was called. I received the email notification along with all homeowners, but chose not to attend. Instead, I sent a brief, polite message indicating I was under the weather but looked forward to hearing the meeting outcomes. Ted Miller came by afterward, barely containing his excitement. "You should have seen it," he said, accepting the beer I offered. "Carol received notification that some company called Lakeview Enterprises has purchased the marina and dock lease. She is in absolute panic mode, talking about community rights and historical usage patterns and all sorts of legal gibberish." "Did they mention what the new owner plans to do with the property?" I asked innocently. "That is what has Carol climbing the walls." The notice simply informed them of the ownership change and stated that all access agreements are under review pending safety and compliance assessments. "Sound familiar?" Ted chuckled. "Whoever bought that marina is using Carol's own language against her." The following day, new signs appeared at the dock entrance. "Notice: all dock access temporarily suspended pending comprehensive safety review by new ownership. We apologize for any inconvenience. Lakeview Enterprises LLC." The reaction was immediate and intense. My phone rang constantly with neighbors seeking information. Was I affected too? Did I know anything about this mysterious company? What would happen to boat access with summer approaching? I expressed the same confusion and concern as everyone else. "It seems we are all in the same boat now," I told Marie Johnson when she called. "Or rather, none of us are in our boats." Carol attempted to contact Lakeview Enterprises directly, leaving increasingly demanding messages with the answering service my attorney had established. Her final message, which my attorney forwarded to me with amusement, contained thinly veiled threats of legal action and community boycotts. An emergency HOA meeting was scheduled for the following weekend. This time, I decided to attend. I dressed casually but neatly, projecting the image of a concerned homeowner rather than the new master of the lake. As I took my seat in the back row of the community center, I caught Carol watching me with narrowed eyes, clearly suspicious of my suddenly cooperative attitude. The meeting began with Carol's dramatic recounting of the hostile takeover of our community dock by an anonymous corporate entity with unknown motives. She painted a picture of community rights being trampled by outside interests, conveniently forgetting how she had trampled my rights for months. "We have retained legal counsel to fight this egregious assault on our property values and way of life," she announced. This company cannot simply lock us out of our own waterfront. The irony was almost too perfect. I bit my tongue to keep from smiling as homeowners voiced their outrage and concern. The very people who had watched in silence as I was excluded were now experiencing the same treatment, and they were not handling it well. I sat quietly through it all, watching the community that had failed to stand up for me now scrambling to protect their own access. The tables had turned. The leverage had shifted. And no one in that room, least of all Carol, had any idea that the power now rested in my hands. After allowing tensions to simmer for exactly 1 week, I made my next move. Through Lakeview Enterprises, I issued a comprehensive new dock usage policy. The document, professionally printed on company letterhead, outlined strict new access requirements. Due to liability concerns and documented mismanagement of water access facilities, Lakeview Enterprises, LLC, is implementing a verified access program for all dock and marina facilities. Effective immediately, access will be granted only to individuals who 1. Complete a dock safety certification program. 2. Sign an acknowledgement of rules and proper usage guidelines. 3. Pass a background check for prior incidents of property damage or harassment. 4. Are not currently serving on the Lake Sherwood HOA Board of Directors. Applications for certification can be submitted to the Marina office beginning next Monday. The final requirement banning HOA board members was perhaps petty, but after months of their arbitrary rule enforcement, it felt like poetic justice. I had my attorney review the document to ensure it was legally sound, if aggressive. Copies were mailed to every household in the neighborhood and posted at the dock entrance. The reaction was swift and chaotic. Most homeowners were confused but willing to complete the certification process to regain water access. The HOA board members, however, were livid. Carol confronted me directly for the first time in months, marching up my driveway as I washed my car. "I know you are behind this," she hissed, waving the notice in my face. "This targeted harassment of board members cannot be coincidental." I maintained a neutral expression. "I received the same notice you did, Carol. It seems this new company has concerns about how the dock has been managed. Perhaps they reviewed security footage or incident reports. This is illegal discrimination. We will sue this shell company back to wherever it came from." I dried my hands calmly on a towel. From what I understand about property law, which admittedly is not much, private property owners have significant discretion over who they allow access to their facilities. Much like the HOA had discretion over who received key fobs to the dock entrance. Her face flushed with anger. "That was completely different. You were in violation of community guidelines." "Which one specifically?" I asked, the question I had been asking for months without answer. She sputtered, unable to articulate the phantom violations she had used to torture me. "The board determined." "Yes, the board determined," I interrupted quietly. "And now the property owner has determined. Interesting how that works, is it not?" She stormed away, already on her phone, presumably calling the HOA attorney. But I knew what she would soon discover. Lakeview Enterprises was on solid legal ground. The dock and marina were private property, and the access lease gave the owner broad authority to establish safety protocols. That weekend, I hosted a small gathering on my back deck. I had invited Ted and Marie, along with a few other neighbors who had been quietly supportive during my ordeal. During the party, a representative from Lakeview Enterprises, actually my attorney's paralegal, playing the role, arrived with certification paperwork for my guests. Mr. Patterson asked me to expedite these applications, she explained loud enough for curious onlookers to hear. As the previous owner speaks highly of you as responsible waterfront users. Within an hour, my friends had completed their certifications and received new electronic access cards to the dock. We made a show of walking down to the water together, boarding my newly repaired Liberty, and sailing out into the lake for a sunset cruise. From the water, I could see Carol and several board members watching from their properties, frustration evident in their rigid postures. The neighbors who had once shunned me at Carol's direction now waved enthusiastically from their docks, hopping for similar expedited access. The community sentiment was shifting rapidly. What began as unified outrage at the new ownership was evolving into targeted anger at Carol and her board. At the grocery store, at the local cafe, at the community pool, conversations centered on one question. How had the board managed to antagonize the new Marina owner so thoroughly? What had they done to poison this crucial relationship? Carol's support base was crumbling. The very power structure she had built through intimidation and selective enforcement was collapsing, as homeowners realized her leadership had cost them their precious lake access. The Queen was losing her subjects, one by one. And I, the once exiled homeowner, was now sailing freely on the waters that had been denied to me, waving politely to my neighbors on shore as I passed. The Lake Sherwood HOA held an emergency election 3 weeks after the dock access restrictions went into effect. The meeting notice cited critical leadership requirements in the face of unprecedented community challenges. In plain English, Carol had become a liability they could no longer afford. I attended the meeting, sitting quietly in the back as before. The room was packed, with homeowners standing along the walls. The atmosphere crackled with tension and resentment, not directed at the mysterious Lakeview Enterprises, but at the board members seated at the front table. Carol attempted to maintain her authoritative demeanor, but her voice wavered as she called the meeting to order. Before she could even introduce the first agenda item, Mark Stevens, a respected long-time resident, stood up. "I move for an immediate vote of no confidence in the current board," he announced. "Their mishandling of the Marina relationship has jeopardized our property values and quality of life." The motion was seconded immediately by multiple voices. Carol tried to object, citing procedural rules, but was drowned out by calls for an immediate vote. When the hands were counted, the result was overwhelming: 37 in favor, 3 opposed. The board was dissolved on the spot. Temporary officers were elected to manage the transition. Carol sat frozen in her chair as her nameplate was removed. She did not meet anyone's gaze as she gathered her belongings and walked stiffly from the room. 6 years of unchecked authority had ended in a single evening. The next morning, the interim HOA president, Janet Williams, requested a meeting with Lakeview Enterprises. I arranged for my attorney to represent the company, instructing him to be firm but reasonable. 2 days later, my attorney presented me with the HOA's proposal, a formal apology for past mismanagement of community resources, acceptance of new dock safety protocols, and a request to negotiate access for all homeowners in good standing. In exchange, they offered increased lease payments and a commitment to improved relations. The time had come to reveal my hand. I called another community meeting, this time hosting it on my back deck. As neighbors arrived, curious and confused by the invitation, I welcomed them warmly. When everyone was settled, I stood before them. "I have an announcement to make," I began. "Some of you know the difficulties I experienced with dock access over the past several months. What you do not know is that those experiences led me to take unusual action. I explained my purchase of the Marina property, watching as expressions changed from confusion to astonishment. I outlined the treatment I had endured and my decision to fight back in the only way that seemed effective. I did not buy the Marina for revenge, I assured them. I bought it to restore fairness and ensure that no homeowner could be arbitrarily denied access to the water that drew us all here. There was silence when I finished. Then Ted Miller started to clap. Others joined in until my deck resonated with applause. Many approached afterward to apologize for not standing up sooner, for allowing Carol's reign to continue unchallenged. Over the following weeks, I established a new dock access system, fair, transparent, and equal for all homeowners. I renovated the Marina building, adding a small cafe where neighbors could gather for coffee while watching the sunrise over the water. The final touch was a new sign at the Marina entrance, Catherine's Landing, named after my late wife, who had always encouraged me to stand up for what was right, no matter the cost. One morning, 6 months after revealing my ownership, I sat on the dock drinking my coffee, watching the community come alive around the water. Boats were being launched. Children were fishing off the pier. Neighbors were greeting each other warmly. Carol had sold her house and moved away, unable to face her fall from power. The new HOA board operated with transparency and reason, focused on serving the community rather than controlling it. As I boarded Liberty for my morning sail, I reflected on the journey that had brought me here. I had come seeking peace and found war. I had faced isolation and emerged with a stronger community. I had nearly lost my dream but reclaimed it on my own terms. The lake stretched before me, open and inviting. As Liberty's sails caught the morning breeze, I felt a familiar sensation: freedom. But now it was a freedom I had earned, a freedom I had fought for, a freedom I would protect not just for myself, but for everyone who called these shores home. Some might call it revenge. I prefer to think of it as justice, served on the peaceful waters I now truly owned.